December 16, 1944. The Ardennes forest. Hitler launches his final desperate gamble, throwing 200,000 German soldiers into a surprise offensive through the snow-covered Belgian woods. For 6 weeks, the forest became hell-frozen over. Temperatures dropped to 0 Fahrenheit. Men froze to death in their foxholes. Bodies piled up in the snow, preserved by the cold, their faces locked in expressions of terror and pain. 1,000 American soldiers died in those woods. Thousands more Germans. Their blood stained the snow red. Their screams echoed through the trees. That was 80 years ago. But the forest remembers. Ask the Belgian farmers whose land borders those woods. Ask the foresters who work there alone. Ask the hunters who track deer through those same frozen trails. They'll tell you about the sounds that come from the trees on winter nights. The cries for help, the German voices shouting commands, the screams of men burning alive in their tanks. They'll tell you about the soldiers who are still there, still fighting, still dying in an endless winter that never ends. This is Ghosts in the Ardennes, veterans' eerie winter tales, and the stories you're about to hear will change the way you think about history, death, and the forests that remember everything. The Ardennes is a dense forest region that spans eastern Belgium, Luxembourg, and parts of France and Germany. In December 1944, it was supposed to be a quiet sector. The American troops stationed there were either green replacements or exhausted veterans resting after months of combat. They weren't expecting an attack. At 5:30 a.m. on December 16th, the Germans launched Operation Wacht am Rhein. Watch on the Rhine, a massive offensive involving 3 German armies, over 400,000 men, designed to split the Allied forces, capture the port of Antwerp, and turn the tide of the war. It was Hitler's last roll of the dice. The attack caught the Americans completely by surprise. German artillery rained down on foxholes and command posts. Panzer tanks rolled through the forest. Paratroopers dropped behind American lines, wearing U.S. uniforms, spreading confusion and terror. The weather was catastrophic. Heavy fog grounded Allied aircraft. Snow fell constantly. Temperatures plunged below 0. Soldiers who were wounded and couldn't move froze to death within hours. Medics found men dead in their sleeping bags, killed by the cold as much as by enemy fire. The fighting was brutal. House-to-house combat in Belgian villages, tank battles in frozen fields, infantry clashes in the thick forest where visibility was measured in yards. Units were surrounded, cut off from supply lines, fighting until their ammunition ran out. At Bastogne, the 101st Airborne Division was encircled by German forces. They held out for 6 days with dwindling supplies under constant bombardment in sub-zero temperatures. When the German commander demanded their surrender, Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe sent back a one-word reply: nuts. They held, but not everywhere. In some places, the American lines collapsed. Entire units were overrun. Hundreds of soldiers surrendered. And in the chaos, atrocities occurred. At Malmedy, 84 American prisoners of war were machine-gunned in a field by SS troops. Their bodies were left in the snow, frozen solid, not recovered for weeks. Near Wereth, 11 African-American soldiers who had surrendered were tortured and murdered. Their bodies were found with broken legs, bayonet wounds, fingers cut off. The Battle of the Bulge lasted 6 weeks. By the time it ended in late January 1945, over 89,000 Americans had been killed, wounded, or captured. German losses were even higher, over 100,000 casualties. The forest was littered with wrecked tanks, destroyed vehicles, and bodies that wouldn't be recovered until spring. The Allies won. The German offensive failed, but the cost was staggering, and according to those who live in the Ardennes today, that cost is still being paid. Because the men who died in those frozen woods, they never left. Robert Palmer was 19 years old when he fought in the Battle of the Bulge. He was a rifleman with the 106th Infantry Division, one of the units that bore the brunt of the initial German assault. His division suffered over 600 casualties in the first 3 days. Robert survived. He was wounded twice, evacuated, and spent 6 months recovering in England. After the war, he went home to Iowa, got married, raised a family, and tried to forget about the Ardennes. For 60 years, he succeeded. Then, in 2004, his grandson convinced him to return to Belgium for the 60th anniversary of the battle. Robert reluctantly agreed. He'd never been back, never wanted to go back. They visited the sites where Robert had fought, the woods near Sankt Vith, where his unit had been surrounded, the foxholes where he'd spent Christmas Eve 1944, listening to German soldiers singing carols in the distance, the field where his best friend, Eddie Morrison, had died from shrapnel wounds. The trip was emotional, but it gave Robert closure, or so he thought. On the last night of their visit, Robert and his grandson stayed at a small inn near the village of Bastogne. That's less than 2 miles from Malmedy, where the massacre occurred. Robert went to bed early. He was exhausted from the day's travel and the weight of memory. But at 2:17 a.m. he woke up suddenly. His grandson, sleeping in the next room, heard Robert shouting. He ran in to find his grandfather sitting up in bed, staring at the wall, shouting at people who weren't there. "Get down! Get down! They're coming through the trees!" His grandson shook him, tried to wake him, but Robert was locked in the nightmare, or in the memory, or in something else entirely. Because Robert wasn't just reliving a dream. He was seeing something. There were soldiers in the room, Robert said later, in an interview recorded by a WWII Preservation Society. Not ghosts, not transparent, real soldiers. Solid. Wearing American uniforms, covered in snow and blood. They were terrified. Running. And they were warning me. They kept saying, "They're killing the prisoners. Don't surrender. Whatever you do, don't surrender." Robert's grandson saw nothing, but he heard his grandfather describe details he couldn't have known. The soldiers Robert saw were wearing the patches of the 285th Field Artillery Observation Battalion. That was the unit massacred at Malmedy. Robert finally calmed down. The soldiers faded away, but he didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, he and his grandson checked out of the inn immediately and flew home to Iowa. Robert died in 2009, but before he passed, he told his family that going back to the Ardennes had been a mistake, that the forest hadn't forgiven him for surviving, that the men who died there were still trapped, still fighting, still trying to warn the living about the horrors that happened in those woods. "They're still there," Robert said. "And they're angry, not at me, not at anyone specifically, just angry that they died so young, so far from home, in that God-forsaken frozen hell. And they can't leave. The forest won't let them go. The Ardennes forest is managed by foresters, men and women who maintain the trails, monitor the wildlife, clear fallen trees, and patrol for poachers. They work alone, often miles from the nearest road, in conditions that can be harsh and isolating, especially in winter. Luc Mercier has been a forester in the Belgian Ardennes for 32 years. His territory includes a section of forest near Foy, where some of the most intense fighting of the Battle of the Bulge took place. American and German soldiers died by the hundreds in these woods, their bodies scattered among the trees. Luc knows the forest better than anyone. He can navigate it in complete darkness. He knows every trail, every clearing, every landmark. But there are places he won't go after sunset in December. "It's the voices," Luc said in a 2016 interview with Belgian television. "You hear them in the winter, especially around the anniversary dates. Mid-December through January, voices calling out in English and German. Sometimes close, sometimes distant. Always urgent, always afraid. Luke first heard the voices in his second year on the job. He was checking a trail near the site of a former American foxhole line. It was late afternoon in December, the sun already setting, when he heard someone calling for help. It was clear. "Help me! Oh God, help me!" In English, with an American accent. I thought maybe a hiker was injured, so I followed the voice. It led me deeper into the forest, off the trail, into an area dense with undergrowth. I kept calling out, asking where they were, telling them I was coming, but the voice just kept repeating, "Help me! Oh God, help me!" Always from up ahead. I followed for maybe 15 minutes. Then it just stopped. Luke searched the area thoroughly. No hiker, no injured person, no footprints in the snow except his own. He reported the incident to his supervisor, who smiled and said, "Welcome to the Ardennes. You'll hear them again." He was right. Over the years, Luke has heard the voices dozens of times. Sometimes they're calling for medics. Sometimes they're shouting coordinates. Sometimes they're just screaming, "He's not alone." Other foresters report the same phenomena. Marie Dubois works a territory near Bastogne. She's heard German voices, commands barked in harsh tones, the sounds of men marching through snow. Once, on a particularly cold January morning, she heard the unmistakable sound of a firefight. Rifles cracking, machine guns chattering, men yelling. It lasted for 3 minutes. Then silence. She investigated. Found nothing. No reenactors. No explanation. But the most disturbing... On January 1st, 1945, American soldiers allegedly massacred between 60 and 80 German prisoners near the village of Chenonye. It was retaliation for the Malmedy massacre. The German POWs were lined up in a field and machine-gunned. The incident was covered up. It only came to light decades later through veteran testimonies and historical research. The field where it happened is now part of the forest. And according to foresters who work that area, it's one of the most active locations for paranormal phenomena in the entire Ardennes. "You can feel it when you enter that section of forest," said Alain Rousseau, who's worked the Chenonye area for 18 years. "The air gets heavy. The temperature drops, even in summer. Animals avoid it. You never see deer there. Birds don't nest there. And in winter, you hear them. German voices, young voices, begging, pleading. Some are praying, some are cursing. And sometimes you hear the machine guns, short bursts, then screaming, then silence." Alain has encountered hikers who stumbled into that area and fled in terror. Some report seeing soldiers, German soldiers, standing in formation, staring at nothing. Others hear the shooting and assume it's hunters until they realize the sound isn't coming from any specific direction. It's coming from the earth itself. "Whatever happened there," Alain said, "it stained the ground. The forest absorbed that violence, that injustice, and it's never let go. Those men died as prisoners, helpless, betrayed, and they're still there, still experiencing that betrayal, over and over." The foresters have a saying, "The Ardennes never forgets, and it never forgives." Scattered throughout the Ardennes forest are remnants of the battle. Old foxholes, partially collapsed but still visible. Trenches dug by soldiers who lived and died in them. Shell craters, now filled with leaves and undergrowth. Rusted pieces of equipment half buried in the soil. These sites are popular with history enthusiasts. Some people camp near them, hoping to connect with the past, to imagine what the soldiers experienced. Sometimes they get more than they bargained for. In 2011, 3 American college students studying abroad in Europe decided to spend a weekend camping in the Ardennes. They were all history majors. Fascinated by World War II, they'd researched the battle extensively and found coordinates for a foxhole complex where the 1st Airborne had held defensive positions during the siege of Bastogne. They hiked in, set up camp about 50 yards from the foxholes, and spent the afternoon exploring the area. They found rusted sea ration cans, spent bullet casings, even a battered helmet half buried in the dirt. That night, the temperature dropped below freezing. They built a fire, made dinner, and settled into their sleeping bags around 10 p.m. At 1:30 a.m., they were woken by voices. Sarah Jennings, one of the students, described the experience in a post she wrote on a historical forum the following week. We all heard them at the same time. Voices. Men talking in low tones. We thought maybe other campers were nearby, but the voices were coming from the direction of the foxholes. We grabbed our flashlights and looked, but we couldn't see anyone. The talking continued. We could make out words. How much ammo you got left? Well, maybe 2 magazines. That's not enough. They were American accents. Young guys. They sounded exhausted and scared. Then we heard a different voice. Louder, more authoritative. Stay sharp. They're gonna come again at dawn. It was so clear, like someone was standing 20 feet away. The 3 students sat in their tent, listening. The voices continued for about 10 minutes. Conversations about ammunition, food, the cold, normal soldier talk. Except there was no one there. Then they heard the attack. It sounded like a battle erupted, Sarah wrote. Gunfire, explosions, men shouting, Germans yelling in German. It was overwhelming. We could hear bullets hitting trees. We could hear someone screaming that they were hit. It went on for what felt like forever, but was probably only 3 or 4 minutes. Then it stopped. Total silence. We were terrified. We grabbed our stuff, didn't even bother packing properly, and hiked out of there in the dark. Used our flashlights and basically ran the 3 miles back to where we'd parked our car. I don't care if people think we made it up or that we panicked over nothing. I know what we heard. Those soldiers were there, fighting, dying, right there in those foxholes. And whatever part of them is left, they're still doing it, still holding that line, still defending Bastogne. Similar accounts exist from other camping groups. In 2014, a Belgian scout troop camping near Houffalize reported hearing German soldiers singing. A full chorus singing what sounded like a military marching song. The scoutmaster investigated and found no one. The singing continued until dawn, then stopped abruptly. In 2017, a French couple camping near the site of a tank battle reported hearing engines in the middle of the night. The grinding, roaring sounds of tanks moving through the forest. The man went outside and saw nothing, but the ground beneath his feet was vibrating. The sounds passed by their tent, moving through the woods, and faded into the distance. In 2019, a group of British military history buffs camping in the area where the 106th Infantry Division was surrounded reported seeing lights moving through the forest at night. Flashlights, they assumed. But when they called out, there was no response. The lights moved in formation, bobbing up and down like soldiers on the march, then vanished into the darkness. The local authorities in Belgian Ardennes towns have an unofficial policy now. They don't encourage people to camp in certain areas of the forest, especially in December and January. Not for safety reasons, but because of the complaints. The reports of strange experiences. The groups that pack up in the middle of the night and flee, terrified. The forest, it seems, doesn't want visitors. At least not in winter. At least not in the places where young men fought and died in the snow. Those places belong to the ghosts now. The town of Bastogne is the heart of Battle of the Bulge history. The Bastogne War Museum is one of the most comprehensive World War II museums in Europe, dedicated to telling the story of the battle and honoring those who fought. The museum houses thousands of artifacts, uniforms, weapons, personal effects of soldiers, letters they wrote home, photographs of men who would be dead within days, the physical remnants of the battle. And according to the staff, the museum is active. Françoise Laurent has been a curator at the Bastogne War Museum since it opened in its current location in 2014. She oversees the artifact collection and works late hours cataloging and preserving items. She's experienced phenomena, that have shaken her scientific, academic worldview. Artifacts go missing, Françoise said in a 2018 interview. Small items, a soldier's lighter, dog tags, a watch. I'll catalog them, place them in storage, and the next day they're gone. We have security cameras. No one takes them. They just vanish. Sometimes they reappear, weeks later, in different locations. A lighter I cataloged in January shows up in July on a completely different shelf in a locked storage room. The security guards at the museum have their own stories. Michel Beaumont works the night shift. He patrols the empty galleries, checking doors and windows, ensuring the artifacts are secure. He's worked there since 2015. You hear footsteps, Michel said. Regular footsteps, like someone walking through the exhibits. I've chased that sound dozens of times, never found anyone. The museum is empty, the doors are locked, the cameras show no one. But the footsteps continue. And the mannequins. We have display mannequins dressed in period uniforms, American and German, positioned in dioramas. Sometimes their positions change. An arm that was down is raised. A head that faced forward is turned. We've checked for settling, for vibrations from traffic. There's no explanation. But the most intense experience at the museum involves a specific artifact. A jacket that belonged to an American paratrooper from the 101st Airborne. The soldier's name was Corporal James Hendricks. He was killed on December 21, 1944, during a German artillery barrage. His jacket is displayed in a case in the main gallery. It's blood-stained. There's a tear in the back where shrapnel entered. Visitors frequently report feeling ill when they stand near that display case. Nauseous. Dizzy. Some have fainted. In 2016, an American veteran visiting the museum with his grandson stood in front of Corporal Hendricks's jacket and began to cry. He told the staff that he could feel the soldier's presence, that the soldier was trying to communicate, that he was showing the veteran images of his death. The veteran described seeing a foxhole, an explosion, being thrown into the air, landing hard, looking down at his chest and seeing blood, feeling cold, calling for a medic, and then nothing. The veteran had no way of knowing the details of Corporal Hendricks's death, but what he described matched the after-action reports from that day. Corporal Hendricks was in a foxhole when a German 80mm shell landed nearby. He was hit by shrapnel, wounded critically, and died before medics could reach him. The museum staff now includes a warning near that display. It doesn't mention ghosts or hauntings. It simply says, "This exhibit contains authentic artifacts from soldiers killed in action." Some visitors may find the emotional impact overwhelming. But France, that jacket is more than cloth and thread, she said. It's soaked with the last moments of a young man's life. His fear, his pain, his desperate desire to survive. That doesn't just disappear because 80 years have passed. It's still there, still radiating from the artifact, still reaching out to anyone sensitive enough to feel it. Museums are supposed to be places of education, of remembrance. But sometimes they're more than that. Sometimes they're prisons for memories too powerful to fade. And the soldiers whose memories are trapped here, they're still fighting, still dying, still hoping someone will remember them and understand what they endured. Just outside the town of Bastogne, there's a village called Foy. On January 13, 1945, the 101st Airborne launched an attack to recapture Foy from German forces. The assault was spearheaded by Easy Company, 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment. If those designations sound familiar, it's because Easy Company would later be immortalized in the book and HBO series Band of Brothers. The attack on Foy was costly. Easy Company suffered heavy casualties. Their commanding officer, First Lieutenant Norman Dyke, froze under fire and was relieved of command mid-battle. Soldiers died in the open streets, cut down by German machine guns positioned in the buildings. But they took the village. Today, Foy is a quiet farming community. The buildings destroyed in the battle have been rebuilt. Life goes on. But on winter nights, especially around the anniversary of the battle, locals report seeing something that shouldn't exist: ghost tanks. The first reports came in the 1970s. A farmer driving home late at night on the road between Bastogne and Foy reported seeing a Sherman tank parked on the side of the road. He slowed down, confused. There was no military exercise scheduled. The tank looked old, authentic, covered in snow. As he drove past, the tank's turret rotated toward him. He could see figures in the tank, soldiers, wearing World War II-era uniforms and helmets. They stared at him as he passed. He looked in his rear-view mirror. The tank was gone. The farmer reported the incident to local police, who dismissed it. But over the years, other drivers have reported the same thing: a Sherman tank, appearing suddenly on the roadside, then vanishing. In 1989, a truck driver swerved off the road trying to avoid what he swore was a tank driving directly at him. His truck hit a tree. He was hospitalized with minor injuries. He insisted a tank had been in the road, driving without lights, heading straight for him. No tank was ever found. In 2003, a Belgian couple driving through Foy at night reported seeing not one, but 3 tanks moving through a field adjacent to the road. The tanks were in formation, moving slowly through the snow. The couple stopped their car and watched for several minutes. They could see the silhouettes of soldiers riding on the tanks. Then the tanks reached a tree line and simply disappeared. Didn't drive into the trees. Disappeared. Faded away like fog. The couple reported the sighting to a local historical society. Researchers checked the location against historical maps and discovered that the field where the couple saw the tanks was the exact route Easy Company's armor support took during the attack on Foy. The tanks the couple described and the tanks other witnesses have seen are M4 Sherman tanks, the same model used by American forces in World War II, but here's what makes it truly eerie. During the Battle of the Bulge, several Sherman tanks were knocked out near Foy, destroyed by German anti-tank guns. The crews burned alive inside. Some of the tanks remained in the area for months after the battle, frozen monuments to the men who died inside them. The tanks that witnesses see at night are damaged, scarred, smoke-stained. Several witnesses have mentioned seeing damage consistent with anti-tank rounds. One witness, a military vehicle enthusiast, described seeing a Sherman with a penetration hole in the turret, exactly where a German Panzerfaust would strike. These aren't pristine museum pieces. They're combat-damaged vehicles from 1945, still operating, still carrying their crews toward an objective they never reached. Paranormal researchers call them crisis apparitions, ghosts that appear at moments of extreme trauma and continue to replay those moments. The crews of those tanks died violently, trapped in burning metal, and according to the theory, they're still there, still driving through the snow toward Foy, still trying to support the infantry attack, still, on some level, fighting the battle. The village of Foy has a small memorial to Easy Company. It's located near the center of town, marking the site where some of the heaviest fighting occurred. Local residents leave flowers there. American veterans visit and pay their respects. But the locals will tell you, if you're driving through Foy on a winter night, especially around mid-January, watch the roads carefully, because you might see them. The ghost tanks, rolling through the snow, carrying their dead crews, heading toward a battle that never ends. And if you do see them, don't stop. Don't try to interact. Just keep driving, because those tankers have a mission, and nothing, not even death, is going to stop them from completing it. The Battle of the Bulge didn't just affect soldiers. Civilians were caught in the crossfire. Belgian and Luxembourgish families trapped between two armies. Thousands were evacuated. Hundreds were killed. Entire villages were destroyed. And some of those civilians never left. In the village of La Glaise, there's a house that's been in the Mercier family for 4 generations. It's a stone farmhouse built in the 1800s, sitting on the edge of the forest. During the Battle of the Bulge, German forces occupied the village, and the Mercier family at that time was forced to shelter in their cellar for 2 weeks while fighting raged outside. Today, the house is owned by Pauline Mercier, a teacher in her late 40s. She grew up in that house, and she grew up seeing the girl. "I was 5 the first time I saw her," Pauline said in a 2017 documentary about civilian experiences during the battle. "I was playing in my room, and I looked up, and there was a girl standing in the doorway. She was about my age, blonde hair, wearing an old-fashioned dress, dirty and torn. She was just staring at me. I wasn't scared. I thought she was a new friend. I asked her if she wanted to play. She didn't answer. She just turned and walked down the hallway. I followed her, but when I got to the hallway, she was gone." Pauline told her mother about the girl. Her mother's face went pale. She took Pauline down to the cellar and showed her something she'd never shown her before. Scratched into the stone wall of the cellar were names. Names carved by the Mercier family during the battle in case they didn't survive. They wanted their names to be found, to be remembered. One of the names was Elise Mercier, age 6. She was Pauline's great-aunt. She'd died during the battle. According to family history, Elise had been sick with pneumonia before the Germans came. Trapped in the cold cellar for 2 weeks, with inadequate food and no medicine, she grew weaker. She died on Christmas Eve, 1944, in her mother's arms. The family couldn't bury her properly. The ground was frozen and the fighting was too intense. They wrapped her body in blankets and placed her in a corner of the cellar until the battle moved on. By the time they could give her a proper burial, she'd been dead for 3 weeks. Pauline continued to see Elise throughout her childhood. The ghost girl appeared in different rooms of the house, always wearing the same torn dress, always silent, always staring with sad, hollow eyes. "She wasn't scary," Pauline said. "She was lonely. I could feel it. She didn't understand why she was still here, why she couldn't leave. She was a child, confused, looking for her mother." As Pauline grew older, the sightings became less frequent, but they never stopped. Even now, as an adult with children of her own, Pauline occasionally sees Elise, standing at the top of the stairs, looking out a window, always silent, always sad. And Pauline's children have seen her too. Her daughter, Emma, now 12, has described seeing a blonde girl in an old-fashioned dress. Emma calls her the quiet girl. She says the quiet girl doesn't play. She just watches. Pauline's son refuses to go into the cellar. He says there's a girl down there, and she's crying. Similar stories exist throughout the Ardennes. Families who live in houses that survived the battle report seeing civilian ghosts. Children who died of cold, hunger, or disease during the fighting. Adults killed by artillery shells or caught in crossfire. Elderly people who died of heart attacks from the stress and fear. These aren't soldiers. They aren't warriors. They're innocent victims of a war that came to their doorstep. And many of them, like Elise, don't seem to understand that they're dead. They're still trapped in those terrible winter weeks of 1944, still cold, still hungry, still afraid. The Ardennes is filled with inherited hauntings. Ghosts that have been seen by multiple generations of the same family. Passed down like heirlooms. Grandparents who saw them, parents who saw them, children who see them now. "It's part of living here," Pauline said. "The Ardennes is beautiful. The forest is majestic. The villages are charming. But underneath all that beauty is sorrow. So much death happened here, so much suffering. And it left a mark, a stain that won't wash away. Elise is part of our family now. She's been here longer than I have, and I think she'll be here long after I'm gone. Because whatever keeps her here, whatever prevents her from moving on, it's not something the living can fix. It's between her and the forest never lets go. So why is the Ardennes so haunted? Why do these experiences persist, reported by credible witnesses across decades in consistent patterns? Skeptics point to the power of suggestion. The Ardennes is saturated with World War II history. Memorials, museums, battlefield tours. People come here expecting to feel something, so they interpret natural phenomena as supernatural. They point to psychological factors: isolation, darkness, the eerie quiet of the forest at night. The human mind fills in blanks, creates narratives, sees patterns where none exist. They point to environmental factors. The Ardennes forest is dense. Sound behaves oddly. Echoes can be distorted. Wildlife noises can sound human. Fog and shadow create optical illusions. These are all valid points. The human mind is suggestible. Expectations shape experience, but they don't explain the consistency. Different people, different backgrounds, different levels of knowledge about the battle, all reporting the same phenomena in the same locations. They don't explain the specificity. Voices speaking in period-appropriate English and German. Tanks that match the exact models used in 1944. Uniforms that match photographic evidence from the battle. They don't explain the artifacts. The items that go missing and reappear in museums. The equipment found in locations that match historical records. Paranormal researchers offer different explanations. Some believe the extreme cold played a role. Frozen bodies, frozen ground. The theory suggests that extreme cold can somehow preserve traumatic energy, like a recording frozen in time. Others point to the violence and scale of the suffering. 19,000 American dead, over 100,000 total casualties. That much death, that much fear and pain in such a concentrated area could theoretically create a psychic imprint, a scar on reality itself. Some researchers focus on the geology. The Ardennes sits on ancient bedrock, layers of slate and sandstone. Some theories suggest that certain types of rock can store and replay electromagnetic energy. That traumatic events create electromagnetic signatures that get trapped in the stone and replay under certain conditions. And then there's the simplest explanation, the one that doesn't rely on science or psychology. The one that people have believed for thousands of years across every culture on Earth. Maybe ghosts are real. Maybe death isn't the end. Maybe the young men who died in the Ardennes, so far from home, so violently, so unjustly, couldn't move on. Maybe they're trapped by unfinished business, by trauma, by the sheer wrongness of dying before they'd really lived. Maybe the forest itself has memory. Maybe the land absorbs what happens on it, and in places where unspeakable horrors occurred, that memory bleeds through, particularly in winter, particularly when the conditions match those terrible weeks in December and January of 1944 and 1945. Maybe Robert Palmer was right. Maybe the forest won't let them go. And maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe these hauntings serve a purpose. They force us to remember. They make the history tangible, real, impossible to ignore. They ensure that the sacrifice made in those frozen woods isn't forgotten, isn't reduced to dates and numbers in a textbook. The ghosts of the Ardennes are witnesses. They testify to what happened there. And as long as they remain, the Battle of the Bulge will never be just history. It will be living memory. The Ardennes is one of the most beautiful regions in Europe. Rolling hills covered in dense forest, quaint villages with medieval churches, peaceful streams and meadows where deer graze in the early morning light. But walk into those woods in December. Stand in a clearing where foxholes are still visible in the frozen ground. Listen to the wind moving through the bare trees. Feel the cold seeping through your coat. And imagine what it was like. Imagine being 19 years old, thousands of miles from home, in a frozen forest, surrounded by enemies who want to kill you. Imagine running out of ammunition, out of food, watching your friends die, wondering if you'll see the sun rise again. Imagine dying there, in the snow, alone, in pain, calling for help that never comes. The men who fought in the Battle of the Bulge endured hell, and some of them never left. Not really. Parts of them are still there, still fighting, still holding the line, still trying to complete the mission. The veterans who survived carried the Ardennes with them for the rest of their lives, in nightmares, in flashbacks, in the way they startled at loud noises and couldn't stand the cold. And the veterans who didn't survive, maybe they carry the Ardennes too. Maybe they're still there, in a way we don't fully understand, trapped in those frozen woods, reliving the battle, unable to move on. If you ever visit the Ardennes, go with respect. Remember what happened there. Honor the courage it took to fight in those conditions. Pay your respects at the memorials and cemeteries. And if you hear voices in the forest, if you see soldiers who shouldn't be there, if you feel the presence of the dead, don't be afraid. They're not there to hurt you. They're there because they can't leave, because the forest remembers, because the battle never really ended for them. They're still on duty, still standing watch, still protecting the ground they paid for with their blood. The ghosts of the Ardennes are heroes, trapped heroes, frozen in time, in the worst winter of their lives, fighting a battle that never ends. Remember them, honor them, tell their stories, because as long as we remember, they're not forgotten. And as long as they're not forgotten, their sacrifice still means something. This has been Ghosts in the Ardennes Veterans' Eerie Winter Tales. The forest remembers. The snow remembers. The ghosts remember. And now, so do you.